Welcome to my video essay examining the current era of Doctor Who. As a long-time fan and member of the LGBTQ community, I've watched with both excitement and trepidation as Russell T Davies returned to the helm of the show for its 60th anniversary and beyond. What began with tremendous promise, the return of beloved showrunner, the historic casting of Ncuti Gatwa as the first Black Doctor, and renewed commitment to diverse representation has evolved into something far more complex and, at times, disappointing. Today I want to explore the nuances of this era's approach to representation, political themes and character development. I analysed how the show's intentions, however noble, sometimes fall short in execution, while also celebrating the moments when it truly shines. This isn't about condemning the show outright, it's about examining how even well-intentioned representation can miss the mark when not executed with depth and authenticity.
Part 2, the 60th Anniversary Specials, a promising but flawed return. When Russell T Davies returned for the 60th Anniversary Specials, expectations were stratospheric. Davies, after all, had successfully revived the show in 2005 and created some of its most beloved characters. The announcement that David Tennant would return not as the 10th Doctor, but as the 14th, alongside Catherine Tate's Donna Noble, generated tremendous excitement. The three specials, The Star Beast, Wild Blue Yonder, and The Giggle, were indeed a glorious nostalgia fest, as some critics described them. They successfully bridged the gap between Jodie Whittaker's era and what's to come, while providing emotional closure for long-time fans. However, they also revealed some concerning patterns that would continue into the Ncuti Gatwa era. The introduction of Rose Noble, Donna's transgender daughter played by Yasmin Finney, exemplifies both the promise and problems of this new approach to representation. As a trans viewer, I was genuinely thrilled to see a trans character in a major role on Doctor Who. Finney's casting was inspired, and the subtle revelation that Donna had named her daughter after Rose Tyler was a beautiful touch connecting to the show's history. However, Rose's character often felt defined by her transgender identity rather than developed beyond it. Her dialogue about the Doctor being a man felt awkward and forced, not because trans people don't discuss gender, we do, constantly, but because it didn't emerge organically from her character or the situation. It felt like the writers were checking a box rather than creating a fully realised person. This is the fundamental tension in the current era. Representation that announces itself rather than integrates naturally into the narrative fabric of the show. Compare this to characters like Captain Jack Harkness, whose pansexuality has expressed through his actions and relationships rather than explicit statements about his identity. Part 3. Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor. Historic casting, uneven writing. The casting of Ncuti Gatwa as the 15th Doctor was revolutionary, the first Black Doctor to lead the show in its 60-year history. Gatwa brings tremendous energy, charisma, and emotional range to his role. His performance has been justly celebrated, earning him a BAFTA award for the Best Actor in 2024. Gatwa's Doctor is vibrant and expressive, with a fashion sense as colourful as his personality. His explicit queerness marks another historic first for the character, allowing for new storytelling possibilities and connections. When the writing serves him well, Gatwa's Doctor is magnificent, curious, compassionate, and complex. However, even the most talented actor can only elevate material so far. Too often, Gatwa's Doctor has been saddled by dialogue that prioritises messaging over character development. Her writing frequently tells rather than shows, explaining the moral of the story instead of allowing viewers to reach their own conclusions. This approach undermines both the character and the political themes the show attempts to address. When the Doctor becomes a mouthpiece for specific viewpoints rather than a complex character engaging with difficult questions, the result feels didactic rather than dramatic. The best science fiction doesn't preach, it presents moral dilemmas in fantastical settings that allow us to examine our own world from new perspectives. Part 4. Bright spots in a troubled era. Despite these criticisms, there have been genuine bright spots in the current era that demonstrate what Doctor Who can achieve when it balances representation with strong storytelling. Episodes like Dot and Bubble, Rogue and Boom, and particularly The Well, stand out as examples of the show at its best. The Well especially succeeded integrating its themes organically into a compelling narrative rather than explicitly stating its message. It created a scenario that naturally prompted the viewers to consider complex moral questions. The characters felt like people rather than positions, and the diverse identities enriched rather than dominated the story. Dot and Bubble, despite being the Doctor light due to Gatwa's filming commitments elsewhere, demonstrated how
The show can explore contemporary issues like social media and isolation through science fiction metaphors rather than direct statements. It trusted the audience to draw out connections rather than spelling everything out. These episodes prove that representation and political themes aren't inherently problematic. It's all in the execution. When diverse characters are given depth, agency, and complexity, when political themes emerge naturally from the narrative rather than being imposed upon it, Doctor Who still has the power to inspire and challenge its audience. Part 5. The problem of checkbox representation. The fundamental issue with the current era isn't that it includes diverse characters or addresses political themes, it's that it often does so in a manner that feels performative rather than authentic. This is what I call checkbox representation. The inclusion of marginalised identities to fulfill a perceived obligation rather than to tell meaningful stories about diverse experiences. Checkbox representation reduces complex identities to simplistic tokens. It creates characters defined primarily by their marginalization, rather than their personalities, desires, fears, and growth. It announces its progressiveness, rather than embodying it through thoughtful storytelling. This approach does a disservice to the very communities it aims to represent. As a member of the LGBTQ community, I don't want to see queer characters whose entire purpose is to be queer. I want to see fully realised people whose queerness is one of the aspects of their complex identities. Characters who have goals, flaws, relationships, and arcs of that both inform and transcend their marginalised status. The best representation doesn't call attention to itself, it simply exists, normalising diverse identities by treating them as ordinary rather than exceptional. Bill Potts wasn't revolutionary because she was a lesbian. She was revolutionary because she was a fully developed character who happened to be a lesbian. Part 6. The politics of Doctor Who, then and now. Doctor Who has always been political. From its very first episode, with Barbara and Ian challenging the Doctor kidnapping of them, to the Third Doctor's environmental activism, to the Ninth Doctor's anti-gun stance. The difference isn't that the current era addresses political themes, it's how it addresses them. In previous eras, political messages emerged organically from character-driven stories. The Zygon two-parter in Series 9 didn't simply declare war is bad, it created a complex scenario with valid perspectives on both sides, culminating in the Doctor's passionate plea for peace that felt earned rather than imposed. The current era often reverses this approach, starting with a message and building a story around it. This results in characters who feel like mouthpieces rather than people, and conflicts that feel contrived rather than compelling. When villains become transparent stand-ins for real-world political positions, they lose their moral ambiguity that makes for interesting antagonists. Russell T Davies has publicly dismissed criticisms of the show being too woke, stating he has no time for online warriors who complain about diversity. While some criticism of the show is undoubtedly rooted in bigotry, dismissing all concerns about writing quality as anti-diversity sentiment prevents meaningful dialogue about how representation can be done effectively. The issue isn't that Doctor Who includes diverse characters or progressive politics, it's that it sometimes does so at the expense of good storytelling. Representation matters, but how that representation is executed matters just as much.
Part 7. The way forward. So what would better representation in Doctor Who look like? It would start with character first, identity second. It would trust the audience to understand nuanced themes without explicit explanation. It would present complex moral dilemmas without obvious right answers. It would normalise diverse identities by treating them as ordinary aspects of fully realised characters. The episodes that succeed in the current era, The Well, Dot and Bubble, and Rogue, and Boom, demonstrate that this approach is possible. They create compelling narratives first, and allow their themes to emerge naturally from those narratives, who present diverse characters whose identities inform but don't define their stories. As Doctor Who continues to evolve, my hope is that it will learn from both its failures and successes. The show doesn't need to abandon its commitment to diversity or its engagement with political themes. It simply needs to integrate these elements more organically into character-driven storytelling. Conclusion. I criticise Doctor Who because I love it. I want it to succeed in its representation of diverse characters and its exploration of complex themes. When it falls short, it's not because these goals are unworthy, it's because the execution doesn't match the ambition. The current era of Doctor Who represents both tremendous progress and missed opportunities. The casting of Ncuti Gatwa as the first Black Doctor and the inclusion of explicitly transgender characters like Rose Noble are historic milestones worth celebrating. But true representation goes beyond casting and explicit identity labels. It requires the creation of fully realised characters whose diverse identities enrich rather than limit their stories. As we look into the future of Doctor Who, let's hope for an approach that balances progressive values and complex narratives, that presents complex moral questions without easy answers, and that creates diverse characters who feel like people rather than positions. The show has always been at its best when it challenges us to think for ourselves, rather than telling us what to think. Thank you for watching this analysis. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the current era of Doctor Who, and how you think the show could better balance representation with storytelling. Until next time, Allons-y!